Hello everybody, welcome to the Atheist Experience. I'm your host Matt Dillahunty. Joining me this week, Martin Wagner. And we have a special guest joining us, Dr. Darrel W. Thanks a lot for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
Dr. Darrel W. is the author of The God Virus, How Religion Infects Our Lives and Culture. We'll be talking to him more about this book. First of all, I wanted to welcome you to the show, and we'll talk a little bit about the book, but I thought we might start by getting a little background, your history, both with respect to religion, and also you were a psychologist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm an organizational psychologist now. I was a clinical psychologist the first 10 years of my career, but I moved into organizational psych and have been there for like the last 25 years or so, and travel around the country working with corporations and that sort of stuff. That's the way I make my real, it's my real job. I make my living. So, but I started out on the religion side. You're interested in that, I assume. Raised in a fundamentalist home. My parents eventually, as they became retired, became missionaries. I mean, it was that strong. Right. My grandfather on my father's side was a country church minister for 40 years. My grandfather on my mother's side was elder. So all sorts of Sunday school teachers and ministers, cousins, I mean, all sorts of people like that in my family. Super, super religious. Mm-hmm. And was married in a fairly fundamentalist environment when I first got married many, many years ago. And just went off, got a bachelor's degree, got a master's degree in religion, and decided that just wasn't working for me too well. So I went on to get a doctor's in psychology and tried to stay as liberal as possible in my religious leanings until finally got divorced and didn't have to stay in that religious setting any longer. Yeah.
And when did you actually manage to escape from religion? Or?
I was pretty much an agnostic, I think, by the time I was 35 years of age, and probably an atheist by the time I was 40, but certainly didn't advertise it. I mean, I was still raising kids. I had fundamentalist parents, grandparents, ex-in-laws. I mean, lots of consequences for doing that, so I just tried to stay real low-key.
The book is The God Virus, mm-hmm. and you liken religion to a virus in a computer sense or a biological sense, or both, kind of?
Both. Computers get viruses. This is a computer. It can get viruses too. Now, I look at viruses primarily as negative, as parasitic, as harmful to the organism it invades.
Sure.
That computer virus gets into your computer. It wants to do bad things to your computer and then move on to the next computer, if you will. Well, there's other kinds of ideas that seem to act and look like computer viruses. And if you think about it, the Catholic Church has got a whole set of instructions. The Protestant Church, Baptist Church, Islam, they have a set of instructions that they want to infect your brain with at a very early age. In fact, if they don't get you early in your lifetime, they're probably not going to get you at all. So almost all religions put a huge emphasis on infecting people as soon as they're born and keeping them infected for a lifetime, if you will. So that's kind of the gist of, there's a lot more to the book, obviously, but that's kind of the gist of it. How do people get infected with this, and why do they stay infected for a lifetime? Right. Even educated people, why do they get infected and stay infected?
You mentioned before how religions make use of guilt.
Yes, right.
And human needs and desires in order to propagate. I wonder if you might talk a
little
about that.
When you're a young child, you get told don't put your hand in the cookie jar. So you put your hand in the cookie jar, despite your mom's warning, and you get your hand slapped. But that cookie sure tasted good, didn't it?
Right.
Well, the next day your mom's not around. So you put your hand in the cookie jar, you eat it, and it still tastes good, but then you get this little twinge. You know, Mom told me not to do that. A little twinge. We call that twinge guilt. And in psychological terms, it's cognitive dissonance. Here's the rule, you broke the rule. You express that dissonance through guilt. That's a normal cycle. I call it the guilt cycle. In the book, I spend a whole chapter talking about how does the guilt cycle work. Well, religion comes along and says, aha, if we teach you to be guilty about something, then we've got you for life because you've got to come back to us to get forgiveness for that guilt. Well, it may be something that, in a different religion, what if I would belong to a religion that expected you to put your hand in the cookie jar before the meal and eat it? Then I wouldn't be guilty about putting my hand in the cookie jar and eating it. I would be guilty if I didn't put my hand in the cookie jar and eat it. Religions, from one religion to the next, will teach different guilt functions. Mm-hmm. But no matter what, the guilt always comes back to that particular God virus's teaching. Different cultures use guilt in different ways. For example, the Hawaiian culture, before Western religions got there, put a lot of issues and emphasis on guilt related to foods, but not around sex. Hawaiian culture, marriage was a very loose structure, and whether you had sex before you were married, after you were married, or how many sexual partners you had was pretty much irrelevant. But do not eat this food on Thursday morning at 3 o'clock. Just don't do that. And women couldn't eat certain foods during menstruation. Children could never eat certain foods. Adult men could only eat certain foods. Lots of taboos and rules around foods, but nothing around sex, or very little around sex, until the American missionaries got there. What'd they do? They said, you guys better put your clothes on or God's going to kill you. And lo and behold, they didn't put their clothes on, and 3 weeks later, people started dying of smallpox. So that makes that God look pretty powerful, right? So people start getting dressed, putting clothes on, because these missionaries are going to, their God's going to kill you if you don't do it. And so this starts breeding guilt into them. First thing any religion does any major religion, whether it's Islam, Christianity, Mormonism, almost any of the major religions, first thing it does is create guilt around, especially around sex and sexuality. That's a huge thing for all these religions, because we're going to do it.
Oh, yeah.
And religion knows you're going to do it, so let's make you feel guilty about it.
It seems like a structure that's designed, and I'm not a psychologist, but to create a dependency.
Absolutely, right.
And I can, the food stuff is something that we might laugh at because it's unfamiliar to us. And yet, when you look at it from kind of a more objective perspective, it's not really any more ridiculous. And I'm wondering how the major religions came to be so fascinated with sex as their tool.
Because it works.
Yes.
Because it works. Now, if you look at the Jewish religion, it has quite a few food rules, and not as many, in some ways, not as many rules around sex as the Protestant religions, the Islam, Catholicism. There's not quite as much there. So even within Western culture, we can see differences by religion. But the nice thing about sex is everybody's going to do it. And if we can make people feel guilty about it, we can propagate. We can spread our religion all over the place through what I call the guilt cycle, injecting people with lots of guilt. Now, Judaism is plenty of guilt, and plenty of guilt even around sex in some ways, but not nearly as much as the Catholic or the Protestant religions have.
In some ways, this seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? Because you would think, okay, yeah, everybody has sex occasionally, and pretty much when you have it, you like it. Mm-hmm. So you would think that the most successful religions in the world would be sex religions, right? Where everyone was having just phenomenal orgies and having a great time. Yeah. Simply because everyone enjoys sex. But so it seems counterintuitive that the way to have, at least in the West, very successful religious, moral, I hate to, it's a loaded word, but the brainwashing,
right,
in terms of what you think is moral or not, is to have very strong prescriptions against something that most people would consider to be one of the most enjoyable activities in life.
Right, yeah.
And that's a little baffling, isn't it?
It is. Well, it's not baffling when you realize what the God virus is trying to do. It's trying to find the best way to infect you and your progeny. Because the most efficient way to manipulate and perpetuate a religion is from generation to generation. Parents raise their kids. You get the God virus from your parents. God viruses are sexually transmitted. Religion is a sexually transmitted disease. You get it from your parents, and you get it because of so much emphasis is put on that. Man, we got off on sex real early in this program. What are we going to talk about the rest of the time?
That's The content of this video is produced by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. If you enjoyed this content and are willing and able to provide a donation, please visit the website below.